Hi, welcome to my Champions League predictions. Here is the draw that got released on the 27th of February. I think we have some interesting matchups here. We have the classic Real Madrid against Manchester City that we seem to get every year without fail, but it is always a good game to be fair. We have the current Champions League winners facing Chelsea. Also, Bodo Glimt versus Sporting Lisbon is an exciting matchup, with both teams doing impressively well in the first stages of the competition, with Sporting Lisbon defeating the current champions Paris Saint-Germain in the group stages and Bodo Glimt getting some very impressive wins, beating Manchester City and Atletico Madrid in the group stages and beating Inter Milan 5-2 on aggregate over 2 legs. As well, Bayern Munich are playing Atalanta, which I think will be the most entertaining game of the 8 games, with both teams being in good form at the moment. Atletico Madrid versus Spurs, which will be very difficult for Spurs, with Spurs being in terrible form at the moment and Atletico Madrid are good at knockout football. Then we have Arsenal versus Bayern Leverkusen, which would have been a great matchup in 2024, but again I think this current Bayern Leverkusen team will struggle massively against Arsenal, who are in great form as they are not in the best form themselves. A similar situation for Barcelona against Newcastle, where I also think Newcastle will be very vulnerable against Barcelona, especially because of the way both sides play. Then finally, Galatasaray versus Liverpool, which is also an interesting matchup, as Galatasaray did beat Liverpool 1-0 in the group stages, and so they will be going into the fixture with some gained confidence, with the belief that they could come out on top against this Liverpool side. Game number 1, Paris Saint-Germain versus Chelsea. The first game between the two will be hosted in France at the Parc des Princes, and the return fixture will be hosted by Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Paris Saint-Germain will definitely be the favourites to qualify in this matchup, but don't write off Chelsea. I expect both games to be competitive with plenty of goals. The French side are not in the same form they were at the end of last year, and they are much more beatable this year. And Chelsea did actually beat them in their previous encounter recently in the Club World Cup 3-0. However, I do still think Paris Saint-Germain will be too much for Chelsea across the 2 legs. My prediction is that at the Parc des Princes, I think Chelsea will lose to the home side quite comfortably, and at Stamford Bridge, I think Chelsea do actually win, but the goal difference will be favouring the French side and they will progress. Game number 2 is Galatasaray versus Liverpool. As I mentioned earlier, Galatasaray beat Liverpool at home in the group stages. Galatasaray at home are a different beast. Their home record is much better than their away record. The Turkish fans are quite hostile and create a very intimidating atmosphere for any opposition visiting Istanbul, almost acting as a 12th man. However, Anfield is also notoriously a very difficult stadium to go, with countless examples of top-tier teams getting beat at Anfield, like Barcelona, who famously got beat there 4-0 to make it 4-3 on aggregate. Honestly, I would favour Liverpool to win at Anfield against most teams in the world. Even when their form isn't great, they turn up at Anfield, as Manchester City have learned over the years. Liverpool are not as good as they were last year when they won the Premier League. However, recently they have just started to pick up some form in recent games. My prediction is that Galatasaray win at Rams Park in Istanbul narrowly in the first fixture. Then Liverpool win at Anfield by more goals in the second fixture and go through. Game number 3 is Real Madrid versus Manchester City. This game is difficult to predict. I wouldn't be surprised if either team progressed. I don't think either team has been at their best this season, but that's not to say they've been playing badly, just not to their high standards they've set themselves over recent years. I think Manchester City's January signings make a huge difference to these games, especially Mark Guéhi, who has been exceptional for City since he came in. With City looking very vulnerable at the back before his arrival, but Semenyo has also slotted straight into the team and is firing for City. The Santiago Bernabeu is a fortress of a stadium, as City know over recent years. Similar to Anfield, I would favour Madrid to beat any team in the world there. My prediction is that Real Madrid beat Manchester City at the Bernabeu in the home fixture, then get beat in the away fixture at the Etihad. then go to extra time due to an even aggregate, then Real Madrid qualify by going through on penalties after nothing to split the sides after extra time. Game number 4, we have Bayern Munich versus Atalanta. I think this will be an exciting matchup, with Atalanta's recent form being very good, with a great home form beating Juventus 3-0 in the Coppa Italia, and of course defeating Bayern's rivals Borussia Dortmund over the 2 legs in extra time after pulling back a 2-goal deficit from the first game. Bayern have been very good this season, currently 11 points clear after defeating Dortmund in their last game 3-1 away from home, and only losing 1 game in the whole of the group stages to Arsenal at the Emirates. I expect standout performances from Harry Kane, Luis Diaz and Michael Olise, as they have been exceptional this season. My prediction is that the 2 teams draw at the Gewiss Stadium in Italy, with teams scoring, and then Bayern beat Atalanta comfortably at the Allianz Arena, with both teams scoring again. Game 5 is Newcastle versus Barcelona. I think this will be the most one-sided tie, with Barcelona currently top of La Liga in great form this season and playing exciting football under Hansi Flick. Newcastle, on the other hand, currently sit 13th in the Premier League under Eddie Howe, playing poorly recently, conceding 42 goals in the league. I just think Barcelona will be too good for Newcastle, with players like Lamine Yamal, who scored a hat-trick in Barcelona's last fixture versus Villarreal, Ferran Torres, Robert Lewandowski and Rafinha up top. I would say they have the best attack in the world in comparison only to Real Madrid and Bayern Munich. My prediction is that Barcelona will beat Newcastle in the first fixture at St James Park and will also beat them at Camp Nou comfortably in both legs, with Barcelona scoring a lot of goals combined in the 2 games and proceeding to the quarter-finals. Game 6 is an interesting matchup, with Atletico Madrid playing Tottenham Hotspur. Atletico currently sit 3rd in the league, 13 points away from league leaders Barcelona, while Spurs are 16th in the Premier League, facing a possible relegation threat. Last winning a game in the league in December 1-0 against Crystal Palace. Despite this, Spurs' form in the Champions League was actually very good, finishing 4th with recent wins against Dortmund and Frankfurt, losing only 1 game in the whole group stage. Atletico Madrid are quite an inconsistent team, as they get big wins against the best sides, then lose to the smaller teams, which can also be said with Spurs against Manchester City in recent years. Both teams definitely have vulnerabilities, and either team could gain the upper hand at any stage of the fixtures. However, Atletico do normally play better in knockout football, due to the way Diego Simeone sets the team up. I also think Sorloth will be shine in this tie and be the difference for Atletico. My prediction is that Atletico beat Spurs in their home fixture at Riyadh Air Metropolitano, then draw in the away fixture, having a close game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium to see Atletico Madrid go through on aggregate. Next up on Game 7, we have a great matchup. This is a game I will look forward to watching, as I believe it will be very competitive, with both teams having a good chance of getting through, with both of them displaying some great football in the group stages of the competition. As I previously mentioned, Sporting Lisbon beat the current champions Paris Saint-Germain, which they were huge underdogs for, and got a good win against Marseille. Bodo Glimt have been on an amazing run, beating Atletico Madrid, Manchester City and Inter Milan. And not just getting narrow wins, they won convincingly, demolishing Manchester City 3-0 and battering Inter Milan 5-2 across the 2 legs, which no one would have expected prior to the tie. Bearing in mind, Inter Milan have just reached 2 Champions League finals recently. My prediction is that Bodo Glimt win at home at the Asmira Stadion in the first leg, and then Sporting Lisbon win in the second leg at the Estadio José Alvalade in Portugal, taking it to extra time through an even aggregate score, in which Bodo Glimt win after extra time and proceed to the next round. Finally, the 8th and final game is Arsenal versus Bayern Leverkusen. I expect this to be much like Barcelona-Newcastle, in that Arsenal will just be far too good for the German side. Arsenal are currently top of the Premier League, having lost only 3 games this season in the league and had a very impressive run in the Champions League, winning every single game, including Bayern Munich, Inter Milan and thrashing Atletico Madrid 4-0 at home. There isn't one singular goalscorer for Arsenal, like a Haaland or an Mbappe. The whole team scores goals collectively, from all attack, midfield and defence, like their last game versus Chelsea, where Saliba and Timber, both defenders, scored for Arsenal to secure the 2-1 win. So there are threats all over the pitch, especially on set pieces. Bayern Leverkusen currently sit in 6th in the Bundesliga, being very inconsistent in the league, struggling to pick up any real form. My prediction is quite simple. I think Arsenal win both at the Bayer Arena in Germany and at the Emirates, with Bayern Leverkusen probably scoring a goal or two, but ultimately losing by 3 or more goals on aggregate, and Arsenal go through to the quarter-finals comfortably. So these are my quarter-finalists based off my predictions, showing who will face who. There are some really good games here if it were to end up like this, with the left side of the draw definitely being the most difficult. Arsenal certainly have the easiest path to the final out of all the routes, and are therefore the favourites to win the competition. However, if they do manage to reach the semi-final, it would likely be Barcelona, and that would be a very difficult game to win across 2 legs for Arsenal. I would say the hardest route is for Manchester City, who would have to beat Madrid and most likely face Bayern Munich, Paris Saint-Germain or Liverpool, then Barcelona or Arsenal in the final, which will be ridiculously hard for City. However, I wouldn't write anyone off this year. I personally don't think there's any obvious winners, and it is the most competitive it has ever been this year. I look forward to seeing who beats who in the competition and hope for some entertaining games. Comment below if you agree or disagree with my predictions and let me know what yours are. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.